Welcome back to the cinematic universe. Today I will show you a 2016 sci-fi romance drama movie titled Passengers. Watch out and take care. The interstellar spaceship Avalon can be seen traveling through space, heading to a colonized world called Homestead 2. All the rooms are empty, the ship is on autopilot. A total of 258 crew and 5,000 passengers are in hibernation. Suddenly, the ship passes through an asteroid belt that weakens its shields. Power is diverted to the main shield, but the ship is on a collision course with a giant asteroid. Suddenly, an asteroid collides with the ship, causing some damage. The ship begins to repair itself, but one of the hibernation pods is activated. The passenger who woke up was Jim Preston, a mechanical engineer. His pod opens and an automated system helps him wake up, telling him that he spent 120 years in suspended animation and that the ship is only 4 months from Homestead 2. They tell you that you will be able to spend that time enjoying the luxurious aspects of the ship. Jim receives instructions about his identification strip, his cabin, and the main activities he must participate in before his arrival on this planet. Excited and nervous to meet the people on board, she got ready, exited her cabin, and entered the automated classroom intended for the entire learning group. Jim looks a bit alarmed, as the hologram explains the situation on Earth, calling it too crowded, expensive, and redundant. He tells him to leave his question until the end of the lesson, but Jim continues to ask why he's the only one there. He realized that the hologram couldn't answer him and went to find someone else. Arrive at the main esplanade of the ship. No one was there, but an automated information desk offered help. Jim asks to speak to a real person and sends him to speak to the butler, but when he finds no one there, he asks to speak to the captain. When he reached the bridge, although he had no access to enter, he could see that none of the main crew was awake either. Jim eventually goes to the observatory, where he discovers that the ship is actually 90 years from Homestead 2. Realizing that she woke up too soon, she rushes back to the esplanade and sends a message to Earth asking what she should do since she doesn't know how to return to hibernation. The communication system tells you that an expensive call to Earth will take approximate 55 years to get an answer. Jim was devastated. He walks and finds the bar of the ship, where he sees another person. While talking to the bartender, there was something strange about him. When he goes to get him a drink, Jim realizes that he is an android. His name is Arthur. Jim wanted to know more about him, but he couldn't explain to the android how he could have been there before his time. Jim wakes up in his cabin the next morning and goes to the canteen, where he quickly realizes that most of the menu items are reserved for gold-class passengers only. He drank his empty coffee and tried to figure out how to fix his hibernation chamber. After getting all the tools, he managed to get it working and lay down in the pod. But nothing happened. Next, he decided to use the tools he found to break into the crew's hibernation room. That didn't work either. Minor glitches occur around the ship. Jim kept going back to the bar to drink, but mostly to talk to Arthur. The android gave him some advice that convinced him to break into one of the golden classrooms and try to have fun on board. Jim tried all the restaurants, games, and entertainment systems. But as time went by, he became more and more miserable being there alone. One day, he is drunk and wandering around the hibernation pod when he stumbles through an airlock in a spacesuit designed for space travel. Jim puts on a suit and goes to the airlock, pushes the lever and then the button to open the airlock door. Once off the ship, he was mesmerized by the sight. He was the only conscious human being that he experienced at that moment. Jim released the magnet from his boot and floated through space, feeling devastated. He went back inside, removed his suit, but returned to the airlock without putting it on. He pulled the lever, ready to end it all, but changed his mind at the last second, ran back inside, and grabbed the bottle. Jim stood up and was instantly attracted to a woman in one of the pods named Aurora. She finds her file in the directory and listens to her passenger's interview, falling in love with him. He is later seen sitting next to her pod, still listening to her interview. Back at the bar, he reads some of his work and talks to Arthur about his writing. He becomes obsessed with the irony of his situation, goes to another planet in search of a better life, wakes up early and never arrives, and searches for his perfect woman, only to have her out of his reach. Jim kept thinking about it and began to have ideas to develop it as well. He discussed it with the android, but he didn't understand the riddle. If he woke her for her own benefit, she would be stranded here with him, to die on the ship. Jim decides against it at first, but as time goes on he can't let it go. Until one day, he changed his mind. He went to his capsule and managed to activate it. When he wakes up and goes through the same process as him, he hides and goes back to his room. He soon headed for the main hall, hoping to find her. And there he was, just as confused as he was a year ago. Jim tells him that they are the only ones awake and takes him to the observatory. He then told her that he could not reach the crew or the main command of the ship. Aurora gets scared and wants to go back to her capsule. When they reach him, Jim explains that there is no special equipment on board that can help them return to hibernation, effectively telling him that they are stranded. They return to the Esplanade and she tells him that she should rest because she just came out of hibernation. He felt sorry for her, having to spend over a year alone on the ship. Jim returned to the bar, feeling remorse for what he had done. He asks Arthur not to tell Aurora that he was the one who woke her up. The next day, Aurora woke up, returned to the foyer and asked the automated information desk about the hibernation pod. Jim joined her there and they went to breakfast. While they were gone, the information desk suffered some kind of damage. In the canteen, Aurora realizes that Jim has been eating the same breakfast for over a year and gives him one of the gold-class menus. They discuss the possibility of fixing the pod, but unlike Jim, Aurora isn't ready to give up. He searched the sickbay, then went through the research documents, and finally ended up in the crew's hibernation quarters trying to open the door. Jim saw more flaws throughout the ship. Sometime later, Aurora mourns her life in Avalon. He wrote, jogged around the ship, and swam in the pool, becoming increasingly aware of his situation. He goes to the cantina to interview Jim, thinking his story might be interesting. He asks her why she migrated to the colony. Jim first replies with the company's slogan, but then explains that he hopes that in the new world he can be someone, can build a life. Later, they end up at the observatory and Aurora finally shares why she's there. Unlike the other passengers on board, he had a return ticket. The idea is to go to Homestead 2, stay there for a year, and come back to Earth, to be the first reporter to do so, to write the best story ever. Aurora slowly gives up on finding a way to fix her current situation and Jim finds a way to make her happy. He took her dancing, to the movies, and to the basketball court. Finally, he takes her to a bar to meet Arthur. He rested for a while until he remembered his situation. Jim was left alone with the android, feeling very sad for what he had done to him. The next moment, she sees him playing with something, and in another, Aurora walks into the observatory to find the miniature Chrysler building he made for her. Sometime later, they have a date at a bar. They have dinner and share stories about their lives. He tells her that his father died when he was a teenager. After dinner, Jim takes Aurora to the airlock and they don their spacesuits. They went out for a spacewalk together. Jim finally had someone to share the great experience with. Jim turns off the magnet on his boots and they float off into space together. They went back inside and immediately kissed, retreating to their cabin and sleeping together. Soon, they began to live as a couple. Aurora moves to her cabin and writes about her life aboard her. They run together, eat together, and sleep together. Jim further explores the ship and discovers a hydroponic bay. He brought flowers from Aurora. One day the ship passed a red giant and they went to the observatory to see it. It was Aurora's birthday, so that night she celebrated it in one of the many restaurants on board and then in the bar. Jim goes to the bathroom and prepares the ring that he made for Aurora, while he stays at the bar chatting with Arthur. The android tells Aurora that Jim woke her up on purpose, not realizing that she is still keeping it a secret. Suddenly, Jim returns, and she confronts him in disbelief. He fled in anger and panic. Jim returned to his cabin to find that all of his stuff was gone. She meets him at the canteen the next day, but when he speaks, she runs off. Aurora was desperate. One night she went to Jim's cabin, she hit him and kicked him, wanting to kill him. Talking to her through her calm while she continues to avoid him, Jim tries to apologize and explain her actions. He tells her that he is in love with her, but Aurora doesn't care. She could never forgive the man for taking her life. One night, while Jim was at his cabin, another malfunction occurred. The ship encountered a critical error and the main command shut down. Then, he enters the elevator and it doesn't work. Aurora entered the main hall and saw that Jim had planted a tree there. Later, she went to the canteen, where the food dispensary did not work either. Suddenly, the two heard the deckmaster's voice over the comlink, asking who planted the tree. They both ran into the hall and saw Gus Mancuso standing in front of Jim's tree. They introduced themselves and told the boss about the situation. He did not understand how 3 capsules could fail. Mancuso takes them to the bridge and discovers that something is wrong with the ship, but the information in the system needs to be manually checked. When they leave the bridge, a robot almost falls on their heads and they both count. Mancuso that damage has occurred throughout the ship more frequently. He says that shouldn't be the case, because he showed them how to collect data. Mancuso inspects the pod when Jim joins him there. He already knew what happened to the Aurora pod. The deckmaster found what Jim was doing terrible. Later, he was on the bridge reviewing the collected data when Aurora joined him. They talk about what happened to his pod, but he tells her that there's nothing he can do about it. Jim enters with the 16th broken robot. Mancuso felt hibernation sick, so he went to rest, but when he came out, he coughed up blood. That night, Aurora couldn't sleep, so she went swimming. Suddenly, there is a loss of gravity throughout the ship and he begins to drown as the pool water moves with him. The gravity drive reset and he barely made it out alive. They both find themselves going in search of Mancuso. The three of them were back on the bridge, slowly thinking about what had happened to the ship. Mancuso realizes that something happened 2 years ago, wiping out an important system. They need to find and fix what has caused the failure as the entire ship tries to recover. If they don't fix it, the whole ship will go aground. They go to find the problem, but Mancuso passes out, so Jim and Aurora take him to the hospital. He is dying and no treatment can stop him or prolong the time he has left. Sometime later, the three meet at the observatory and Mancuso gives Jim his identification bracelet, telling them to repair the ship and immediately perish. Suddenly, the lights turned an alarming red and the ship began to shake. Jim tells Aurora that he needs her help and they run to engineering, but there is another failure in the gravity drive. And soon another one befell Arthur as well. Jim deactivated it. Finally they went to engineering and started looking for problems. They find her at the power plant and when they open the hatch, Aurora is sucked in. The asteroid had caused a rupture in the hull of the ship in the area. Jim inhaled too, but held on to the hatch as it continued to close in on him. In the end, he was also sucked in, but they quickly managed to cover the breach. Shortly after solving the problem, Jim realized that there was more than one hull breach. The two follow the path of the meteor and find it has hit the reactor control computer. Jim thought he could find parts for it. They found the part and replaced it, but the reactor's ventilation process continued to fail. They did it manually, but failed again. Jim realizes that he needs to open the vents from outside the ship so they can cool the reactor. They both go to the airlock and as he prepares to leave, he hands the bracelet to Aurora Mancuso, as she may not be coming back. He helps her with the suit and as she walks to the airlock tells her to come back because she can't live on the ship without him. Aurora returns to the reactor, where the temperature has reached a critical level. Reactor lightning struck his arm as Jim approached the vent from the outside and saw the door. The temperature rose in the reactor room as he tried to bypass the ventilation door to open it. He soon realized that he had to manually open the door so the reactor could be released and told Aurora. She doesn't like the plan, but he goes ahead and tells her to release the reactor. He doesn't want her to die and they argue, but he tells her they have to save someone else and releases the reactor. The process was successful, but the smoke from the reactor pushed Jim away, cutting his rope. The pressure in his suit was also decreasing. He tells Aurora what happened and moves as fast as he can to get another suit and bring her. He apologized to her again. He puts on a suit and flies off to get it, but the leash is too short. He was pulled back, but suddenly he grabbed her anchor and managed to pull her away. Aurora drags Jim to the infirmary, only to discover that he is dead. She uses Mancuso's bracelet to bypass the medical protocol and restore him. The medpod automatically does the job and revives Jim. Aurora forgives him. Aurora then fixes Arthur up and they give Mancuso a space funeral. Jim takes her to the infirmary and tells her that she has found a way to use a medical pod for hibernation. He tells her to get into the pod and travel the rest of the way there. But, as later revealed, he refused and decided to stay with her, awake on the ship. Jim finally proposes to her and they live her life aboard her. 88 years later, Avalon arrives at Homestead 2. The crew woke up to find the ship in an unexpected condition. Aurora left them a message, retelling the story of her and Jim's life on the ship while the others slept.
Thanks for watching this video. By clicking this you can watch the next movie. I happily invite you to watch that beautiful movie. Welcome to the cinematic universe.